Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Happy Friday. Welcome to this session. It's so important for us as an industry association to continuously engage with our members across the sector and to ensure that they understand and are aware of the different policy directions, that's being published by government, because I think, all these policies are wonderful and fantastic, and it's great, but the real value of a policy direction really comes in when it's being implemented. And we can only really implement it when we understand what the policy is about, so that we can then act on that and put processes and procedures in our companies in place so that we can adhere to the policies. So as with everything, policies are always developed to make an environment conducive to investment. That's typically the way that government approach policy directions. How do we make it easier to do a specific thing? The very same can now be said for the rapid deployment policy as well. So it's not a brand new policy. We've done the session before with our members, but it's interesting for me because sometimes I will talk to people in the sector and I will learn from my engagement and my discussions with them that they don't really understand the policy or how the policy impacts them, etc. So on an ongoing basis, we ask the DCDT for a bit of time. We're very fortunate that they are always available, and they're always happy to give us some of their time to present this, in this case, for the second time, presenting this policy direction to our members, to make sure that everybody really understands what this is about and how it affects them, and how they can implement it. So very, very welcome this morning, colleagues. Thank you, Alf, and the team. You're going to introduce the presenters this morning, but I just want to take a moment to thank you, Lesetja and Vusi, for spending some time this morning with our members and to help us understand this policy direction, and to again, present it. I also think it's nice when it happens a second or a third time, because sometimes we've learned a little bit in a process and, we start understanding some of the impacts and what works and what doesn't work. And, none of this is a perfect science. Policy changes, it has to change as the environment for which it's developed changes. So, colleagues, please participate, type your questions in the Q&A session or in the chat, and let's make this an interactive session. I think it's also good for the department to get some of the feedback from the sector on, some of the practicalities when it comes to actual implementation of these policies. But without further ado, thank you very much, Mr. Wiltz and the team from the DCDT for giving us time this morning. I'm going to hand over to you for a few remarks before we start.
Thank you, Juanita, and thank you for those kind words. My name is Alf Wiltz. I'm responsible for telecommunications and IT policy at the DCDT. Our expert presenters are Lesetja Motlatla and Vusi Mthembu. They'll take over from me shortly. We'll also be joined on our side on the panel by the acting DDG for policy and strategy at the department, Alfred Moto, as well as Peter Mello, that heads the Rapid Deployment Coordination Center at the department. Thank you, Juanita, for the opportunity. We believe this helps us with our awareness, and as part of our broader M&E to see whether the policy is on the right track. At least since our last engagement, we've added some new information that at least would be useful to the colleagues here. So we believe we all can benefit from this. Thank you for the opportunity. Over to you, Lesetja.
Thank you, Alf, and thank you, Anita. Thank you for the kind words. I'm Lesetja Motlatla. I'm going to be taking you through to the first 12 slides, And then from there, Mr. Mthembu will take you to the second part of the presentation, which focuses on the M&E. So the issue here is that why did we come up with this policy? It's because Section 21 of the ECA requires the Department of Communication and Digital Technologies to develop this policy in consultation with the authority, which is ICASA, the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, the Minister of Agriculture, Rural Development and Land Reform, the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries, Environmental, and lastly, the Minister of Water Affairs and Sanitation. So what are we trying to address here? What is the problem here? And currently, there's no transparent or consistent framework to accelerate the deployment of electronic communication infrastructure across the country. Therefore, the licensees have got the right to access any property in order to deploy their networks, but there's no guideline exist as for now on how they must exercise those rights, except where they are using the courts. Therefore, the licensees often do not exercise their rights with reasonableness and due care, and then there's no balance of rights between the two parties, both the licensees and the property owners. So what is the objective? What are we trying to achieve here? So the policy seeks to come up with a process that must be followed by the licensees, which is the Electronic Communication Network Service licenses, to access the property to deploy electronic communication network and facilities, including the rights of the landowners and any other person whose rights or legitimate expectations may be materially or adversely affected. Therefore, in the case of the other focus area is that the policy seeks to create a dispute resolution mechanism to resolve the disputes that may arise between the two parties, the landowners and the licensees, or any other person who is going to be affected. So the policy also make provision for ICASA to prescribe regulations on the rapid deployment, including the procedures and process for resolving the dispute that may arise between the two parties. So ICASA is going to develop the regulation in this instance. So what are the key provisions? Well, I'm just going to give you just a snapshot of the key provisions of the policy. So paragraph 6.1 and 6.2 seek to clarify the rights of the ACNS licensees to enter upon and use public and private land for purpose of deploying electronic communication network and facilities. But this right is subject to existing legislations. So it also requires that government entities across the spheres of government that have got the right of ways or servitude for infrastructure such as roads, power lines, and water pipelines must also make sure that they make this infrastructure available for licensees to be able to use them for the deployment of infrastructure. It further provides that government entities, all spheres of government, must, for purpose of broadband deployment, share property and infrastructure, including without limitation high sites, poles, and ducts with licensees upon request. So when they make requests to access those infrastructure. Now, paragraph 6.4, it sought to clarify or to specify the process that licensees must follow when accessing the land for broadband deployment to ensure that there's reasonableness and due care, and that access to the property is done in consultation with the owner of the property and any other person whose rights or legitimate expectation may be materially affected. So in other words, there should be a communication between the licensees and the property owner. Now, paragraph 6.5.1, including 6.5.2, it provides the circumstances when compensation is payable. In this instance, no compensation may be charged by a property owner to licensee for deploying electronic communication network or facilities in cases where the electronic communication network or facilities are not intrusive with reasonable compensation. So in this case, only where not intrusive. So an exception is created for access to communal land that may still be viewed as intrusive based on the views that we got them from the National House of Traditional and Khoisan leaders. So paragraph 6.5.3 and 6.6.2, in summary, it provides the type of disputes that property owners may lodge about the reasonability of compensation and the manner the licensees intends to exercise those rights. It also describes the procedures to follow in this regard. Now, the purpose of 6.6.2 is to provide that dispute must be resolved in accordance with the rapid deployment regulations prescribed by ICASA, but that the use of those dispute resolution process is voluntary. In other words, parties have got the right to say, I can go to, I can use the regulation, or I can go to court. Therefore, the property owner and other affected person may still pursue any legal remedy available to them, but the regulation will still be there to assist. The paragraph 6.8, this one, the purpose of this paragraph is provide that the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental and Provincial Environmental Department must try by all means to expedite the environmental impact assessment approval for broadband deployment, suggesting that it should not take more than 57 calendar days from the date of submission of all the relevant documentation. In other words, when licensee make an application for environmental impact assessment, the department concerned must not take more than 57 days, which is the calendar days. Now, in terms of the consultation, so the policy was finalized and then we published it for public consultation. It was gazetted in July 2020. After that, we considered the submissions from the general public and the policy was revised accordingly. Furthermore, letters of consultation were also directed to the different ministries responsible for different portfolios in ICASA in 2019. This includes the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, the Minister of Agriculture, Rural Development and Land Reform, the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, and lastly, the Minister of Sanitation. Furthermore, we also engaged other government entities and other government departments over and above all those departments that I've mentioned. We also engaged the South African Local Government Association, the National House of Traditional and Khoisan Leaders, and Department of Economic Development and Tourism of the Western Cape. We further engaged the Transnet, Sandra, Broadband Infraco, and Salga, and comments were received and incorporated accordingly. So this is the type of consultation. We consulted broadly across the sector. So this is my last slide. So the policy was then required as part of the priority structural reforms of the operational Vulindlela. This project is in the presidency. And then the final delivery of the policy was then monitored by the president itself. So therefore, the implementation of the structural reform is very crucial to sustain economic recovery and to address the underlying causes of low economic growth and high unemployment. So the policy was lastly approved by Cabinet on March 2023, following which it was published for everybody to access it, read and understand. So this was my last slide, Chair. So I'm going to hand over to Mr. Vusi Mthembu to take you through our audience to the following slides with regard to the MNE. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lisija. Thank you, Juanita. Good morning, colleagues. I would also like to reiterate our gratitude and appreciation to Digital Council of Africa for the opportunity that you have afforded us to talk to your members, to engage them on this very critical policy. I'm now going to take you through the monitoring and evaluation that we conducted as the department. You will recall that section 8.1.1 requires us as a department to conduct an M&E on this policy. And we need to use the monitoring and evaluation framework of government. So in developing the framework, we engaged with our internal monitoring and evaluation unit who assisted us to develop the framework. We also had to do a little bit of training ourselves because M&E is a discipline. It requires certain skills and expertise, which we did not have. But nonetheless, we managed to develop the monitoring and evaluation framework, and we embarked on a process of data collection you will see the heading of the slides that when I'm presenting that there is data that we collected pre 2023, March 23, which was the date of the gazetting of the policy. And there's also data that we collected post the gazetting of the policy so that we could collect baseline data and to use the baseline data to compare what we found. But you need to have a baseline data so that you know where you started. Now, as I've indicated, we developed the monitoring and evaluation framework for the policy. We collected data. We commenced with the monitoring of the performance against indicators, and we concluded the performance against indicators for year 1 of the implementation. Now, this is the findings of the survey questionnaire that was conducted with licensees. It's the baseline data that we collected on the 12 months preceding the 31st of March 2023. You will see the question 1, for an example, that we asked the licensees. We asked them, how many requests for permission to use access servitude of a government entity have you made in the last 12 months preceding 31 March 2023, and how many were successful? And you'll see there the results are as follows. They indicated that 6,971 requests were made, and out of those, 6,489 requests were approved. So this gives an average of 93% approval. On the second question that we asked the licensees, we asked them, how many requests for permission to use and access government property and infrastructure, excluding servitudes, have you made in the 12 months preceding 31 March 2023, and how many were successful? And the results were as follows. 1,598 requests were made. Out of those, 1,271 requests were approved, which gives us an average of 79%, or 80% if you round that figure up, of approvals. The third question that we asked the licensees was, have the ECNS licensee been complying with the conditions of access to land in the 12 months preceding 31 March 2023? And the results were as follows. All licensees state compliance with the conditions for access to land was 100%. And the fourth question that we asked the licensees was, how many applications for environmental impact assessment approvals have you made in the last 12 months preceding 31 March 2023? And what is the average number of calendar days it has taken from the date of submission of the relevant documents to the date of the final decision by the competent authorities? And the results were as follows. 5 requests were made, and it took an average of 165 days for the decision to be made. Now, I'm going to take you through the graphs and the diagrams where we are trying to sort of simplify the findings of the MNE. The graph on your left-hand side represents the responses by the licensees on access to government entity servitudes. You will see there that almost, I would say 100% indicated that the application for servitude were still pending, and a very little percentage of them indicated that the applications were approved and not approved. And on the graph or diagram on the right, these are the types of government services requests that were made by licensees. They range from manholes in road reserves and water servitudes, ducting, SANRAL road reserves. The graph on my left represents the responses that we received when we asked licensees about access to government property according to their application. And the results were as follows. 90% indicated that the approval was pending, and very minimal percentage indicated that it was not approved. And you'll see there that 20% indicated that it was approved. And I just need to draw your attention now that the data that you see in front of the screen represent the data that we compiled from the period of 31 March 2023 to 29 February 2024, which was the second phase of the MNE, so that we were now looking at what is the rate of compliance and what had the conditions of access now, given that we have promulgated the policy. And the type of request that licensees made in terms of accessing government property was as follows. They made applications to install bridge conduits, attachments. They made applications to occupy government masts of a municipality and the Department of Water and Sanitation, and they also made application for site lease. I'm also going to take you through the licensee survey results on compliance data on the period from 31 March to 2023 to 29 February 2024. And this question was specifically focusing on asking the licensees about the government entities where these requests were made to. And you'll see the range of those entities, government entities, which include SAPS, Eskom, Madikwe, Municipality, Telkom, Transnet, Sanral, BBI, Department of Water and Sanitation, and the Departments of Defense. And the diagram on the right, because the question was also probing, we're asking them, what are the reasons for unsuccessful requests? And the response that we got there was specifically directed to Sanral, that Sanral does not allow bridge attachments, conduits to traverse the fiber ducting across environmental waterways. This needs to be engineered into the bridge during the construction because it limits new broadband deployment on older bridges, which form the majority. Now, these findings are conducted in the same period, are looking at the compliance by licensees with regard to access to conditions that licensees need to comply with when they deploy their networks. They are supposed to give 30 days notice. They are supposed to ensure that there's due care to avoid damage to property. They are also supposed to ensure that they comply with best practice and standards and ensure the maintenance of property. And also there's a whole issue of reasonable compensation for intrusive infrastructure. And of course, they need to submit information to ICASA on their GIS database information. Now you will see on the first condition, the 30-day notice, that the majority indicated that they comply, while you have a spread of not applicable and those that said no, they do not comply. The same thing with the condition of access to damaged property. You will see there that the majority indicated that they comply, and there are those that do not comply. Yeah, I think that graph is self-explanatory, colleagues. Because the coloring there, you will see that which ones comply, which ones did not comply. In terms of application for, now I'm talking to the graph on the right-hand side of the slide. In terms of the application for environmental impact assessments, we established that a total of 20 applications for environmental impact assessments were made. and the average number of days on the right-hand side that it took the competent authorities to finalize the EAI application was 160 days. The graph that you see there on the screen talks to the data that we collected on government entities that took more than 57 days to process EAIs. You'll recall that the policy says that at least EAIs must be approved within 57 days. Now, this slide presents to you, colleagues, the findings on the survey questionnaires that we conducted with the property owners. And this is the baseline data that we collected before the policy, preceding the date of the promulgation of the policy. And the question that we asked property owners, for example, was, have ECNS licensees been complying with the conditions for access to land similar to the above in the 12 months preceding 31 March 2023? And the majority of responses were that licensees do not comply with the conditions of access. And the majority of property owners also indicated that they were not aware of the requirements that licensees must adhere to. And this speaks to the point that Juanita raised earlier on, that it's very important that we create a awareness across the range of stakeholders around the implications of the policy. The question 2 was asking is whether the ECNS licensees have been paying reasonable compensation to property owners for building broadband infrastructure that is intrusive in the 12 months preceding 31 March. And the data that we received indicated that only 13 relevant responses were received that constitute 43%. Majority of the property owners have stated that reasonable compensation was paid. Some property owners indicated that they were not aware that compensation is payable by licensees for certain activities, or what would be reasonable compensation. Other owners confirmed that reasonable compensation was paid, but others didn't comment as a result of the structure of the questionnaire. That they only provided a comment of to say no. They didn't want to divulge whether reasonable compensation was paid or not. It is possible to verify that compensation was in fact paid and was reasonable. A number of property owners also mentioned that licensees do not repair the paving driveways outside their yards. Now, these are the survey results of the questionnaires administered to property owners post March 2023 up to 29 February 2024. The question that we asked was, do licensees give 30 days calendar notice in writing of the proposed property access activity to property owner and to any other person affected? And the responses were as follows. 67% indicated that yes, indeed, licensees gave notices, and 33% indicated that they did not give notice. On question 1.2, we asked property owners, do licensees exercise due care and diligence to avoid damage when deploying broadband infrastructure, including restoring the property to its former state? 87% indicated that licensees do exercise due care and diligence to avoid damages, while 13% indicated that licensees did not exercise due care to avoid damages. And then the next question, we asked property owners if licensees do ensure that the design, planning and installation of the broadband infrastructure follow best practices and comply with stage 3 regulatory and industry standard, including safety standard. And 83% of the licensees of the property owners, I'm sorry, indicated that licensees ensured that the design, planning, and installation of the infrastructure did follow the best practices, while 16% indicated that licensees did not follow best practices. This is another question that we asked property owners. Do licensees ensure that the maintenance of the property where broadband infrastructure is deployed and do they provide 40 calendar days notice in writing to the property owner and any other affected persons? 50% of the licensees indicated that licensees do ensure maintenance of the property and do give proper notice, while 50% do not. The next question that was asked: have you as a property owner been affected by a licensee building broadband infrastructure that is intrusive, such as masts or mobile towers that are erected on your property? If yes, explain what type of infrastructure was built and whether reasonable compensation was paid to you. 83% of landowners indicated that they do receive reasonable compensation, though 20% were sort of unsure. And 16% of landowners indicated that they did not receive reasonable compensation on infrastructure, which includes masts, rooftops, antennae, towers, and road reserves and fiber. Now, I'm going to summarize just at high level some of the key findings from this M&E evaluation exercise. And I must indicate that there are other issues also that perhaps I will just share with you that are not captured in this slide. Generally, based on the licensee survey results, licensees are complying with rapid deployment policy, though there is still a room for improvement. Also, based on property owner survey results and comparing the baseline data with the post-implementation data, the majority of licensees seem to be complying with the conditions of access to land and payment for reasonable compensation. Some respondents, however, expressed uncertainty due to a lack of information on what constitutes reasonable compensation. The project illustrated that more attention should be given to the implementation of the policy through, amongst others, the Rapid Deployment Coordination Center, which must develop the GIS database, do awareness and stakeholder engagement, and ICASA, which is responsible for developing the rapid deployment regulations, dispute resolutions, which will also determine the reasonableness, nature of compensation, and collection of GIS database before implementation can be made, can be effectively measured. Just on the survey results as well, what we also found was that property owners are not a homogeneous category. On one hand, you have Mr. Motsipe, Mr. Smith, who is educated and have the legal resources to pursue and ensure that he or she gets administrative justice. And on the other hand, you have Ubaba Mkhize and Mefro Schoonman, who may not have the language competency, may not have the digital skills to know, for an example, if their rights are not addressed, where should they start to engage competent authorities to make sure that issues or any grievance that they are confronted with, particularly dispute between the licensees and property owners, can be addressed to. And this talks to the issue of digital skills, which is one of the key areas that we are looking at as a department. We have a unit that is developing an implementing e-skills program. The case of Ubaba Mkhize is receiving attention with us because his homestead is located, I'm not using his real name, it's a pseudonym. His homestead is located on top of the mountain, not a mountain, a hill. And he has a kraal, and one of the operators installed a big mast inside the kraal. And the kraal obviously now, as you would know, in African customs, a kraal is used not just for keeping cattle, but it's also used for cultural rites. It's a very sacred space. And now each time his cows have to come into the kraal, they have to navigate this big mast that was installed by the operators. And now there are rituals now, there are customs which they have to perform in the kraal. And remember also, depending on the tradition as well, some kraal, not everyone is permitted to come inside the kraal. And now people who are doing maintenance, they will come into the kraal and do the maintenance work. But also what we established was that Mr. Mkhize, Ubaba Mkhize, does not know, because he told us that for the past 3 years, he has not been paid by the operator concerned. He has not been paid what they used to pay. He doesn't understand the conditions of the contract. He doesn't have an email address to say, maybe write to the operator concerned and then ensure that he receive administrative justice. I'm just using this case of Ubaba Mkhize to illustrate that, you know, if we want to create an inclusive digital society, if we want to create an inclusive digital economy, it is important that our policy interventions address the needs and concern of Mr. Motsepe on one hand, and also address the needs and concern of Ubaba Mkhize. The next slide now gives you the whole framework for rapid deployment. I would say this is perhaps the whole ecosystem of rapid deployment, because rapid deployment policy is just but one in a whole range of other policy and programs within the department to ensure the rapid deployment of electronic communications infrastructure. You would have there the rapid deployment policy and the policy direction. You have the Rapid Deployment Coordination Center, which is also responsible for coordination, awareness raising, and the GIS database. You have the ECA Chapter 4, which deals with the rights and obligations. And you have ICASA, who is expected to develop the rapid deployment regulations, which will deal with dispute resolutions, reasonable compensation, and how licensees must exercise their rights and fulfill their obligations. You also have the National Integrated ICT Policy White Paper of 2016. And just to say that, for an example, the issues that I indicated earlier on about the responses and the challenges that licensees experience when they were supposed to have access to SANRAL infrastructure, the policy, the white paper is very clear in terms of what needs to be done there. For an example, the Minister of Trade and Industry must update the building regulations to make sure that new buildings and comply with ensuring that ducts are part of the approval processes for building regulations, to make sure that that response that we got from SANRAL is addressed. We also, of course, have the National Standard Bylaw, which has since been approved, which deals with municipality property and wayleaves. The model bylaw was also approved and expedited through the presidency Operation Vulindlela, which was dealing with the unlocking bottlenecks and ensuring that we quickly implement and develop those policies that will ensure economic growth, that will address issues of red tape. So it was approved during that process. And it was approved by the Minister of COGTA under the Municipality Systems Act of 2000. It is not binding, but may be adopted by municipality. If adopted, all persons who seek to deploy or operate electronic communications facilities under or above municipality property, this bylaw will apply. Essentially, it is for way-leave applications, and it also addresses application fees for way-leaves as they are set out in the annual budgeting framework adopted by the municipality in line with applicable legislation and policies. It also deals with disputes about the bylaws which must be resolved through negotiation and involvement of government structures such as the RTCC. The model bylaw, I think I've touched on that. Okay, there is also a process to implement the model bylaw. And this was reported to us by the colleagues who are in the presidency who were dealing with the Operation Vulindlela. They reported that 2 municipalities, one in the Western Cape, Witzenberg municipality, and the Lesedi municipality in Gauteng, were assisted to craft the bylaw unique to them. The other 2 municipalities were also assisted to develop, for example, land use agreements and lease agreement as required by the model bylaw. The model bylaws were also taken to the council for approval. It's something that we have to follow up to ascertain the status of the approval. Further, the municipalities were also assisted to develop their business processes, to assist business processes exercise, to assist them to process the application. We have also been told that Mhlathuze local municipality in Richards Bay is the latest municipality that has adopted the model bylaw. Now, let me take you through, colleagues, the policy direction to ICASA. The minister has directed ICASA in March 2023 to prescribe regulations on rapid deployment of electronic communications network and facilities. The regulations must promote the public interest in rapid deployment of broadband infrastructure, and it also must speak to the procedures and processes that may include the manner, cost of, and time within which a decision must be made, the implementation and publication of decisions made in terms of the dispute resolution procedure, and how reasonable compensation may be determined. So the policy direction to ICASA will seek to focus on key area to provide accessible, affordable dispute resolution mechanism for disputes between landowners and licensees. And the case of Ubaba Mkhize that I talked to earlier on is one classic example that this dispute resolution mechanism will look at. There is a common misperception that ICASA does not have the jurisdiction of landowners. Not only is jurisdiction established by the ECA, but importantly, dispute resolution is voluntary. Therefore, a landowner can choose to participate in dispute resolution and therefore agree to be subject to ICASA jurisdiction. This position was also agreed by ourselves and ICASA provided concurrence before the rapid deployment policy was finalized. The second key focus area of the regulations requires that the regulations provide how reasonable compensation payable by licenses to landowners should be determined. So we have been informed that ICASA plans to develop the draft regulations in the current financial year and to issue the final regulations in the 2025-2026 financial year. In conclusion, I just want to highlight that this policy, the rapid deployment policy, is very critical for transforming South Africa into an inclusive digital society and inclusive digital economy. We are told by our colleagues from infrastructure who are experts in this, who tell us that fiber deployment is very critical for 5G backhaul because of all the properties, such as it can take high volumes of traffic, it's got minimal latency and the speed. Now, to deploy that fiber, this policy will be critical to make sure that that fiber the process for deployment of fiber is expedited. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'll also reiterate my appreciation to Juanita and the Digital Council of Africa for affording us the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vusi. I really appreciate all your time and Lesetja's time as well. Colleagues, we're going to do some Q&A if there's any questions or if anybody's got something that they want to ask for or understand. I think, Alf, yeah, I'm going to hand over to you, but I think that there were some questions and people wanted to understand City of Cape Town have been publishing some stuff. How does that, fit into a bigger thing? I think Tim is here as well. I'm not going to put him on the spot, but how does the national legislation then dovetail with what's developed at a provincial legislation? Over to you, Alf.
Yes, thank you. So let me pick off by responding to the questions raised in the chat, and then you can ask for more questions. Mr. Blake MTN asks, but how would property owners know the best practices and standards? So yes, that's right. I mean, it's unlikely that the average property owner would know. The obligation really lies on the licensees to ensure compliance. But we thought we'll still ask the question to property owners to ensure a balanced view. And for me, the outcome is not a problem in any event, since 83% said that licensees are in fact compliant. So that should be in order. Mr. Charles Castle asked, don't we have enough policies? We must get to implementation. Can't agree with you more, but if you take that slide that deals with the rapid deployment framework, you'll have to appreciate that it's quite complicated, and if I have the time, I can break that slide up and I can deal in more detail with the white paper and what the white paper of 2016 exactly says. I can go into the National Standard Draft Bylaw. Then I can go into Chapter 4 of the ECA and what that provides. We can drill down then, like we've done here, on one aspect, this particular policy and policy direction. All of that creates a bit of confusion, and it's certainly a complicated framework. So the purpose of a meeting like today is to demystify some of this and see how it fits together. And that's important for all stakeholders, including ICASA, that's busy making regulations, and it's important to see this bigger picture to really be able to properly even regulate in the space. We agree that it's about implementation. We have a role when it comes to implementation. Our primary role is at this stage probably the awareness, and then based on the Rapid Deployment Coordination Centre's role, that's within the department, there's the GIS and coordination. So we certainly play that kind of role. Then ICASA plays a supportive role because they must effectively take some of the policy provisions on access to land, for example, and rights and obligations of licensees, and encapsulate that into regulations to make it more enforceable at the end of the day. So they play a critical role in addition to creating the dispute resolution mechanism. That's a key enabler, because for years we've seen many court cases where disputes arise about these very same matters, and that's why it's easy to say just implement, but because of the uncertainty in the market and the contradicting rights and interests of licensees and property owners, and even licensee versus licensee when it comes to access to facilities, because of that, lots of court cases result and more uncertainty, and it was necessary to start creating, from a government perspective, a clear policy and regulatory environment. So certainly that implementation is ongoing from our side, and as indicated, ICASA is in the midst of developing the regulations. My colleague Peter Mello from the RDCC can speak to his role and the progress with the GIS. But then ultimately the implementation lies with licensees that have to adhere to and give effect to these policy provisions. Then City of Cape Town, I haven't read the question there, but just so I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but in the context of these frameworks, the City of Cape Town would have the right to develop their own bylaws when it comes to when it comes to the municipality. So if I can speak to the National Standard Draft Bylaw, at least, that's a bylaw that's created by our sister department of cooperative governance, and under even that national department can't tell a municipality how that municipality must run the municipality when it comes to infrastructure deployment. So each municipality has their own constitutional competence to deal with that matter, which they do through bylaws approved at the municipal council level. So the typical question that would arise in a forum like this is, but the real problem is municipalities charge too much and for way leaves, and they ask all kinds of guarantees, and one municipality differs from the other. So and that's where the model bylaw comes in. So the model bylaw seeks to give a template, a model, a best practice that we view as what a bylaw must typically look like to be reasonable to all the stakeholders involved. So the power of the Minister of COGTA is merely to say, this is our National Standard Draft Bylaw. We are proposing it to municipalities. Then it's up to municipalities to decide, I like the content. I have no bylaw. I don't have a problem adopting this model bylaw. They still have to go through their own internal approvals. Or a municipality, your typical bigger metros that have established bylaws in this regard, they may choose to ignore the model bylaw. Theirs may even be better. So that would be the context probably of a question from Tim, but maybe you can just rephrase it, then I can hear. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. I see that there's two hands up quickly, and I think Luvo was first, and then Eric. But just in terms, and Jeff as well, Jeff after Eric. Just in terms of what I was sort of trying to get across is that, the private sector also deals with commercial viability for certain areas. So, a lot of the leafy green suburbs have been built, and everybody's trying to monetize lower income areas and go into lower income areas. And in some of those areas, the traditional trenching methodologies just don't make sense. It's not financially viable. So aerial fiber is a viable solution, and we're seeing that a lot of companies are deploying aerial fiber, but then to achieve some form of connectivity into lower income areas. But some of the municipalities just point blank refuse for the planting of poles and just say, in our jurisdiction, you will not plant poles. All fiber will be trenched. And it boggles the mind because, we're really struggling with the thing called the digital divide. There's not a country in the world where they enforce a single type of methodology, because everybody understands that, you know, there's costs, 80% of the cost, 75% of your cost of your fiber network is in the trench, or, you know, certain aspects like that. And it's not just for deploying fiber to the home, it's to expand tower infrastructure, tower backhaul. You know, fiber is needed for all aspects of deployment. But there are municipalities that just says you will not put up, as they call it, washing lines to deploy fiber infrastructure. So it seems like there's a lot of education that needs to be done. But Lufo, I'm going to hand over to you, and then Eric, and then Jeff, and then we can wrap up after that with some answers from Alf. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Juanita, and thanks to the Digital Council and the department for organizing this very important session. I think it's been insightful, particularly the data that we're getting from the respondents that were asked, you know, these important questions on the rapid deployment policy. So I've got two questions, right? One question is to the department. Was this survey opened to all licensees, or was there a closed sample that was taken out of the ICASA list? And then my second question would be also to the department. What efforts has the department made in terms of, you know, workshopping, you know, these, you know, because most of these decisions are made in councils, right? So, and most of the councillors and also the IT managers are quite clueless when it comes to some of these national policies. So what efforts has the department made to make sure that these councillors and these people that are responsible, particularly the engineering departments that deal with the wayleaves, that deal with the management of the municipal infrastructure? Because I say this because we've had quite a lot of encounters with the municipalities, you know, on just accessing water towers in some of these rural areas because of no access to high sites, right? Yeah, so we've had quite a lot of back and forth discussions. We've even cited this policy to them, and they seemingly do not know and also don't understand, you know, what its role is. So I think it would be a very important gesture from the department to workshop these municipalities so that they can be, you know, they can also know and understand what the purpose of this important piece of policy is, because it not only assists them, but it also makes our lives easier for as infrastructure deployers in particularly townships, because we deal with townships and rural areas. Thank you very much.
Eric?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, colleagues. Chair, my name is Eric Nkopodi. I'm one of the project managers at ICASA who's working on this rapid deployment regulations. So, Chair, as we have been struggling, especially to produce these regulations, we had provisionally consulted with some of the forums about these draft regulations that ICASA is about to publish very soon. But the gist of what we received from those stakeholders was that ICASA or the policy does not clarify on how ICASA can have jurisdiction, especially in terms of in the three spheres of government, meaning nationally, provincially, and in the local municipalities. Like, how are they going to operate this regulation? So my question is, how do you envision ICASA overcoming this challenge? As stated, that the regulation that ICASA is trying to develop were aimed nationally. So how can they develop those regulations in such a way that they can cut across all those three spheres of government with ease? And also on the issue of standard bylaws, we do appreciate that they are voluntary. Each municipality will also apply them on voluntary basis. So how do you also see those standard bylaws being operated in order for us to achieve this goal of rapid deployment? Thank you, Chair.
Alf, I'm going to ask you to respond as soon as Jeff has spoken. Then you can just handle those questions. I see Karen also posted something in the chat. Over to you, Jeff. And
Thank you, Juanita, and thanks, Alf and Vusi, for your presentation, which was most enlightening. I'll keep my question at a very broad level, and it's just from a practical perspective. The focus of the policy that instructs the authority to make those regulations seems to be between this relationship between the licensee, the property owner, be that private or government, and then also the regulatory bodies, the other regulatory bodies that may be impacted in terms of approvals, be that the municipality. But not all infrastructure deployed for broadband services is done by licensees. For example, I'm not picking on anyone in particular, but tower companies are not always licensees. And so where do they fit in on this regulatory endeavor? Because they wouldn't be beholden to the regulator in terms of regulations. And so I'm just wondering how non-licensees that are working within this space are taken into consideration. Thank you very much.
thanks, everyone. Alf, I don't know if you want to jump in and maybe we start with Luvo's question, move to Eric's, and then conclude with Jeff.
Yes, let me try. Jonita, your point, and I mean, you know this very well when it comes to aerial fiber. So depending who you are, you would want to promote aerial fiber and you would want to be able to deploy it. But those are usually within municipal areas, and municipalities have local competence when it comes to that. So we cannot dictate to municipalities. I can't recall whether the model bylaw addressed that matter. I doubt it. I suspect it would have left it open. But even if let's say for argument's sake, let's say the white paper or some policy instrument from national says yes, we must allow aerial fiber, and let's say even we convinced COCTA to then include it in the model bylaw that suggests that aerial fiber is permissible. Even if that's the case, then at the end of the day, it's still the municipality's decision, whether based on their own preferences when it comes to aesthetics and other preferences, whether they want to allow it or not. And there's, as far as I can see, no way that we can oblige a municipality. At best, we can persuade and try to convince municipalities that it's in the interest of economic growth, the more networks deployed and the cheaper it costs to deploy. So that's probably the role that we can play, but we certainly can't force anybody. Mr. Gray's got a question about the survey and whether it was closed or open to all licensees. My recollection was that it was open to all licensees. we did a dual approach of first working through the 3 well-known industry representative bodies, and asked that, of which Juanita was one, that we asked that the IRBs distribute to their members, and we thought through that we would be capturing the majority of network providers that we needed this information from. And I think that the net was cast wide enough. Some IRBs maybe did better than others, and in the end we also took the ICASA list and started sending out emails to all other licensees in order to improve the response rate. But obviously we wanted to have a representative sample, and therefore send out to as many licensees as we could, reminded many others on numerous occasions, even tried to threaten some, but in the end, at least we received some responses back. But hopefully in future versions we can do much better.
I just want to add to that, Alf, so we can send it out to our members and we can ask them. So for us, we've got 2 challenges. So the person whose inbox it lands in might not be the right person. And then we sometimes have a problem with them sending it on. So we go back 2 or 3 times saying, please, will you make sure that this gets to the right person? This information is really important to us as a sector, and it's important to ICASA and the regulator and everybody to inform, our policies and whether things work and the implementation thereof, and whether it's having the desired outcomes, with the desire, from what the original intentions were. But at the end of the day, it sits with everybody. But I think as we have these sessions, we can perfect the database and make sure it gets to more people. And we're also, again, asking all of you to make sure it goes to the right person that can put some responses, or if it's got to go to 3 or 4 people, to make sure that we, we complete these questionnaires. It's really important for all of us to get this insight, and hopefully we can receive more of this feedback over time, and measure how we're growing and how we're getting better at, and the impact of the rapid deployment policy. Sorry, Alf, I jumped in.
No, thanks for that. And they're too quick for me, but some of the other experts in the sector, Karen and Dominic, are adding a lot of interesting information to the chat. Dominic being a lead drafter of the model bylaw, so he responded there that the model bylaw includes, it covers aerial fiber and deployment of poles while allowing public consultation on aesthetic concerns, but also confirming that we cannot force municipalities. And I think the second part of the question was about the lack of expertise at council level. And I wish Dominic can perhaps come in here, because he also led the process to pilot the model bylaw. One of the slides we've presented, you've seen that at least 2 municipalities, Witzenberg and another municipality, as well as the Richards Bay municipality, in the end, those 3 were focused on, and the model bylaw was piloted with them. So that's an involved process, because then it's exactly what you're saying. It's about educating all involved, proposing that they adopt the model bylaw, and ultimately that the municipal council agreed to it. I understand they went through various workshops with all the affected officials there, and it had a positive result. The unfortunate part is I learned that that project has now come to an end. So, I mean, there are many municipalities. So the question we have to ask is, what next? Now, it's that particular matter is within the domain of Department of Corporate Governance, and the best we can do is to persuade our colleagues there to continue rolling out these pilots and continue the kind of education and awareness around the model bylaw, so that we can get the greatest possible adoption by municipalities. And at the same time, I think we can also play a role with SALGA, who could similarly play that role in motivating and helping expand the model bylaw. Mr. Nkopodi, I'm so glad ICASA is part of the meeting. Thank you for joining. We do look forward to seeing the draft regulations and to continue working with ICASA on this matter. Yes, you focused on the jurisdiction of ICASA when it comes to the 3 spheres of government. So primarily, yes, the focus is on licensees and landowners, and really about the balancing of rights between those 2 parties, so that licensees know how they must behave when they access land and the requirements they must meet in order to be reasonable to landowners. And similarly, landowners know what they can expect, which is, of course, that balancing of rights and the interpretation of the ECA by the courts that led to that Constitutional Court decision. So ICASA certainly can't resolve all problems and deal with all conflicts, for example, certainly not at municipal level. So somewhere in the rapid deployment policy, it would say that this policy is subject to other legislation. So if matters that are dealt with, including the Municipal Systems Act, so Local Government Municipal Systems Act. So you as ICASA do not have a right to go tell a municipality how they must behave, just as we don't have that right, and even their mother department don't have that right. So there are limitations to ICASA's powers. ICASA must stick to the regulated sector, but then by consent of landowners can also pull in landowners under their jurisdiction, where landowners can then allow this dispute resolution mechanism we want you to create to deal with a dispute instead of them taking it to court. So for the rest of it, a lot of this will be about coordination and collaboration and resolving disputes in different ways. Typically, in our case, that's what the Rapid Deployment Coordination Center must do, and Mr. Mello can come in and add to that. Luckily, we are going through a new process where more resources would be allocated to a dedicated Rapid Deployment Chief Directorate in the department. So, and that's what Peter's doing on a day-to-day basis, really, dealing with lots of conflicts that exist in the market during the deployment of infrastructure. So he would certainly play a certain role in that respect. And then if you, and Dominic will speak about the model bylaw that would typically talk about, also refer to and make reference to other state entities that can play a role in disputes at municipal level. Typically, we have an opportunity to perhaps revive the MOU we had with COGTA during the COVID period that enabled the departments to cooperate, and then from the COGTA perspective to also liaise with municipalities to unlock where there are bottlenecks and problems in deployment. So my point is, not all would be in ICASA's jurisdiction. There are different other bodies that must work in tandem to resolve some of the conflicts that arise. I didn't really get the second part of your question, which is, I think it was back to the standard draft bylaw. Just again, I'm repeating myself, but it's a model bylaw, and it's a model bylaw that really says how anybody that wants to build infrastructure under municipal property, how they must operate, what the do's and the don'ts are, and effectively that comes down to way leaves and land use agreements. So that's a model bylaw. As part of that model bylaw, similar to the rapid deployment policy, it proposes that reasonable fees that are cost-based or based on administrative cost be applied by municipalities. So that's the wish of national government that we'll always be lobbying for. But at the end of the day, it's a model bylaw that's open to municipalities to consider and to adopt if they want, or to use anything in that model bylaw that's perhaps better than what they have already. We hope to, through persuasion and working with SALGA over time, to convince municipalities to charge less, because that's ultimately in the interest of the economy. Jeff, you as always have a difficult question. Yeah, we don't deal with tower companies. All we can do effectively through ICASA is deal with the regulated sector. So that's why whether you read the white paper or the ECA, or you read the rapid deployment policy, or you look at ICASA's powers, it'll always be about the regulated sector and IECNS licensees that have the right to deploy ECNs as defined in the Electronic Communications Act, which means for the time being, tower companies would be operating under the radar. Of course, there is a parallel process under the ECA dealing with competition matters, the ECA bill that perhaps will cast the net slightly wider to also deal with non-IECNS licensees that are involved in any form of infrastructure bill, such as passive infrastructure. But that's a discussion for another day. So the long and short is we can't deal with tower companies at this point in time, but any suggestions from you is certainly welcome.
I think there was a question from Kefilwe, but I know her name was up, but I don't know if she's taken it down, if she's been sorted. And then I see that Jonella has typed some in the Q&A. The question is there any influence that the Rapid Deployment Unit can have on other government entities, such as the Civil Aviation Authority? There are huge bottlenecks in this entity. Backlogs dating back as far as 6 months. I actually heard that it's even longer than 6 months, that it's getting over 9 months now, that not a single approval from Civil Aviation Authority has been sent through after they changed their application process. Alf, I think one of the things that I'd really like to understand is that, we're making strides in technology and things are changing. And if we look at some of these approval processes, for instance, you've got to go to Civil Aviation Authority for any high site or tower that's being constructed. I mean, some of it is like really outdated, and there should be a way that this approval process, as it's currently laid out, gets revisited, and we can there's some stuff that we should say, well, this is only applicable to a 25-meter mast, or this is only applicable to whatever, but it's really delaying the deployment of infrastructure. And is there not a process where we can actually just look at some of these whole approval processes? I know that towers have got SPLUMA and like other things that they need to adhere to, and but it's like insane. I mean, for 9 months, the sector is not deploying any towers because of one problem. One Civil Aviation Authority has appointed a subcontractor that doesn't know what they're doing, and the subcontractor is now responsible for doing all the approvals from the tower codes, and they're just not getting back to the tower codes. There's just no response. How do we handle that?
Yeah, so a single approval is what the policies like to talk about. If you look at the ECA, it actually had that requirement that this policy we brought out. The reason it had to be made were in consultation with various other ministers, because the idea was good. The idea was, well, that department is responsible for this particular permit. That department is responsible for this type of approval. So all of these are the relevant affected ministries. What we must do is just get them together so they agree on a single process. And once we have that single, unified, streamlined a reasonable period kind of application process that can apply to all the authorities and public entities, and there would be no problem. From there, ICASA can just make follow-up regulation. So the idea is nice, and you find this idea then taken further. I mean, this comes from 2005. The idea is taken further in the white paper, and similarly there, it actually tries to then create such a single process, and it sort of mimics the model under the Prudential Infrastructure Commission and the SIPs, strategic integrated projects, and tries to say bring all these key decision makers together in a room and let them deal with an application once. And then in the white paper, it actually did that. It tried to create the streamlined process. But in my opinion, this is unrealistic, because when we started this process of the rapid deployment policy, and that's probably started probably 2017, 2018, that was the first thing we did. We went around to all the various departments and tried to persuade them to come to the table and give us and work on a unified application process that would apply to various public entities. And we effectively hit a brick wall, and I can also understand that from their perspective, because if I'm an officer at Environmental Affairs, I'll be regulated under NEMA, and that particular act sets out specifics about their processes when it comes to EIAs, for example. So that official just doesn't have the authority to go beyond his act. And even if I can, and we tried that a couple of times, get ministers to talk about this matter, for ministers to sit in one room and say, despite all of us having our own laws to deal with this, let's agree we're going to all change our laws now to have a single process. That's almost impossible. And we tried our best, and we just couldn't succeed at doing that. Ideally, I mean, even after getting this policy going and it being approved at cabinet level, this policy is subject to other laws. So it remains subject to NEMA. It would remain subject to whatever the laws are governing the Civil Aviation Authority, etc., etc. So that's when it comes to a single process. When it comes to problematic areas, well, that would be our job. And Peter, again, if he can come in here, typically that if you raise the flag and on a specific public entity that is problematic for rapid deployment, there's no reason why we can't commence a focused engagement with that particular entity. And see if we can find each other and find a way of improving their processes, even just to highlight it to them and to know, so they know it's more than the licensees. It's at a departmental government level that we are noticing a problem, and that if there's a solution that we can work towards. That would probably be my suggestion on that. And then the work of the Rapid Deployment Coordination Center, because again, that's one of their key areas to help unlock some of the barriers. And what we'll also be doing, and someone in the chat asked earlier about what next, where from here. So what we are also doing is, from the survey results, we're identifying problematic departments and entities, and we'll be consulting further with those licensees. If someone raises a problem with Sunroll and the conduits attached to bridges, etc., we just want to understand properly what the problem is, and then we'll raise it with Sunroll. We may not be able to convince them otherwise, but at least they need to know that there is a problem. We think that it's blocking growth, and that if possible they need to do something about it. And so we'll be addressing letters and starting such consultations as part of a follow-up on the M&E process.
Thanks. I think that would be very helpful. So I just want to, I'll give you some feedback and to everybody else on the group. Some of you might have received some letters from the DCDT recently announcing the formulation of certain working groups that will function. There's 4 working groups that's being established, one looking at the digital divide, one looking at sort of digital citizens. One is more on sort of a responsive government, and then one on digital skills. We've been asked and invited by the minister's office to participate in some of these working groups, and we're going to chair the digital divide or the digital inclusion working group from a DCA point of view, and then the minister has also invited me to co-chair the digital policy advisory council together with I think it's Gwen and Gwenya and myself that will be co-chairing that. And I think this is going to open up frameworks for us to really revisit what needs to change, how it needs to change, and to feed into that process. These things are really aligned with Minister Malatsi's priorities that he wants to achieve in his term. But what we've done as part of that is to establish working groups again in our subsets. We used to have them years ago before COVID. They fell flat and now we're resuscitating them. So there's one for fiber network operators, there's one for tower codes, there's one for submarine cables, all the aspects of it. There's even one that we are looking at MVNOs to support some of the MVNOs as well, and one for mobile network operators, but not as it extends to spectrum. That's not our work, that's with ACT. But please look out for those invitations. If you haven't received an invitation, please reach out to myself or to Risha, because we will discuss a lot of these issues within our working groups, digital council working groups, and this will feed then into the ministerial working groups to make sure that we address all the issues. But we don't want to use the ministerial working groups as the platform where we start debating issues. When we get there, we want to be crystal clear on the sector's priorities so that we can effectively feed into those things and make progress as fast as possible. So please let us know if you have not been included in those working groups. Please join us. And Eric, those working groups also from a ICASA point of view will be able to really then speak to the rapid deployment guidelines, that you're trying to establish. So maybe you and I just need to catch up again on those, and we can inform you how we can help, look at those, that document as well that's currently sitting, which I know is giving you a headache. But colleagues, it will be sent out. And this over the next couple of days, together with a link of this recording, will be distributed. And I assume these slides, Alf, if you can just confirm, we can share it and send them out.
Certainly, Chair, they are public.
Great. Thanks. Just a very, very big thank you again to our colleagues at the DCDT. Thank you for your time. We know everybody's really busy and working hard. These sessions are tremendously important, and we look forward. We're going to be hosting them. I think this is already our 3rd one for the year. There's more planned where we touch on other aspects of it. Everybody's always welcome to attend. The intention is to build a solid, investable sector that is bullish. And thanks everyone. Have a really, really fantastic weekend. And we will chat soon. Thank you very much, Alf and the team, everybody that's here from the DCDT as well as the regulator. Have a good. Alf, you wanted to quickly say something?
Chair, you can continue closing, but just on behalf of the DCDT team as well, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the participants for taking the time, but importantly for your valuable insights. I'll still take time to go read everything that was said in the chat. It was good to see all the senior colleagues in the sector also joining us. Thank you.
No, a lot of the same faces, and always a big hearty welcome to the newcomers to the sector. You're welcome to reach out to us for clarity on anything. Good. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will chat soon.